Right, so in this walkthrough guide, I am going to show you creating basic measures in Power BI Desktop. It is based entirely on this online tutorial, which you can find at this link, which I will post in the group chat. And it works with a fictitious data set, the Contoso sales sample for Power BI Desktop. I will also share that with you in the group chat. If you download this file to your PC, then what you get is not an Excel or CSV file, but rather a starter Power BI file. So it's basically a Power BI file with the data already imported inside it. So we have a single file and the data is embedded inside the file. If you open up the Power BI file, you have a number of tables here on the right hand side as shown in the data pane: calendar, channel geography, product category, subcategory, promotion, sales, and stores. So let's say, for example, that we want to visualize the sales amount, and it is a field present in the sales table. I tick that box and already a visualization appeared in the canvas. I'm going to quickly delete that. So if I drag sales amount onto the canvas, then what you see is a very basic bar chart, or rather a column chart. If I hover over this column, then you will see the sales amount in the tooltip. The sales amount, it corresponds with the y-axis of the chart. So here in the visualizations pane, under y-axis, you see sales amount. And if I click the drop down, you see that a sum aggregation was performed on that specific field. So I can tweak this aggregation and change it to an average. So if I click average, you will notice that the Y tick labels, they changed slightly, and here is a subtitle in the chart that says the average of the sales amount. If I hover over the bar chart, I get an average of 3,000 and something. This chart on its own isn't very informative, so I want to make the x-axis a bit more dynamic. So here in the geography table, we see 3 fields: continent, geography type, and region country name. So let's see what happens if I drag and drop this region country name to the visual. Now I'm seeing something a bit more interesting here. On the x-axis, you have country names such as China, Germany, all the way to Sweden and Malta. On the y-axis, we still have the average of the sales amount. The subtitle also gives us a bit of information. It says we have the average of the sales amount by region country name. So this visualization tells us that the highest average sales amount for the period covered by the dataset, that happened for China. and the smallest average sales amount that occurred for Malta. If I go back here to the y-axis, if I click on the drop down and go back to sum, we see something slightly different. The total, or the sum of the sales amount, that achieved a maximum for the United States, and this data over here, it is dominating all the other columns to the right of the United States. Because this value here is so big, the other columns, they are squished to the very bottom of the y-axis. I'm going to switch back to the average sales amount, and I do that by clicking on average. And let's say that I actually want to visualize the net sales, and I can achieve that by subtracting the discount amount and the return amount from the sales amount. As you can see here, there is no field that corresponds to net sales. But that doesn't mean we are only restricted to the fields available in the sales table. So what I can do is I can create my own measure with the help of DAX. So I'm going to right click on sales, go to new measure, and you will see a window popping up here at the very top of my canvas. This is the area where I specify the formula to calculate the net sales. Okay? So as I've mentioned, the net sales, that is the sum of the sales amount minus the sum of the discount amount minus the sum of the return amount. So let me type that here in this formula input window. Now for the net sales to actually reflect inside my sales table, I can either hit enter on my keyboard, or I can click on the tick mark and the tooltip says commit. So the formula looks accurate. There isn't any red squiggly underlining to indicate that some error has occurred. So I'm going to click on commit. And in the sales table you will see that we have this little calculator icon next to net sales. This little calculator icon tells you that net sales, it is a measure that you created. So if I select other columns, you don't see a corresponding formula at the top of the Power BI file. But if I click on net sales, here at the top, which I'm busy highlighting, you see the formula for net sales. Now I want to visualize the net sales in my visual here on the canvas. So first I'm going to remove this field in the y-axis. I still have region country name for the x-axis, and I'm going to drag and drop net sales onto the y-axis, and here you see net sales as a function of region or country name. But let's say I also want to simultaneously visualize the total sales amount with the net sales. So I'm going to drag and drop the sales amount into the y-axis field over here, and here you see an updated chart. Here is the key or the legend to interpret your graph. The green corresponds to net sales, and the black, that corresponds with sales amount. And it intuitively makes sense that the sales amount, it will always exceed the net sales. Why? Because the sales amount, it doesn't deduct the values for discount or returns, as is the case for the net sales. I'm now going to proceed by visualizing the year in a table visualization. So in the visualizations pane, I click on this table icon. Here we see a placeholder. I'm going to drag and drop here on this placeholder, and we run into a problem. This isn't a valid year value. You see, it is some very big value. So if I go to my visualizations pane and go to columns, click the drop down, you will see that Power BI, it performed an aggregation on the year field. It summed all the year values in the calendar table, and that's why we're only seeing this big value over here. We don't want that, so I'm explicitly going to tell Power BI, please, I don't want this year value to be summarized. Don't aggregate it in any way. So I click, let me just show you that from scratch. I go to visualizations, columns year, and the drop down. Click on don't summarize, and we're seeing something better. Every row contains a unique year value, and it spans the range 2005 up until 2018. Consider the case where I want to click on a year and then only visualize the data pertaining to that specific year. So if I click on 2009, I only want to see the net sales and the sales amount for the year 2009. What comes to mind? An excellent tool in Power BI to filter out your data is this one over here, the slicer. So I want to convert this table into a slicer. So first I click the table visual and then select slicer. So what happened after clicking the slicer? I have this slider over here that allows me to tweak my year range. Based on the beginning and the end year in this year range, the data in my visual is going to update accordingly. So if I only limit the data to 2010, look what happens to the visual. It disappeared. We can confirm that this slicer has an impact on this graph over here. If you go to the 3 horizontal stripes here at the top right corner of the visual, the first line reads the filters and slicers affecting this visual. And under year, we read the year is greater than or equal to 2008 and is less than or equal to 2016. These are the values captured in my slicer here on the right hand side. But I decide that this slider isn't user-friendly. I want a vertical list with checkboxes which I can tick to my own liking. So I select the slicer, go to Format Your Visual, expand Slicer Settings, beneath Options. For style, I select Vertical List. Here you see that there is a checkbox next to every year. So I can select the years by ticking the relevant checkbox. Alternatively, I can also hold Control down and select multiple years. And you will see at some point the data in the graph updates dynamically based on the year value selected in this vertical list. Please note that the net sales, it isn't dependent on another simple measure. Why do I say that? It's because the net sales is calculated from the sum of different fields in the sales table. But let's say that we want to use the net sales in another measure. Suppose that you want to find out which products have the highest net sales amount per unit sold. To get that, you will need a measure that divides this, the net sales, by the quantity of the units sold. So what I'm getting at is that we want to create a new measure that divides the result of the net sales, this field here. We want to divide the net sales by the sum of the sales quantity. So I'm going to create that new measure now in the formula bar here at the top. I right-click Sales, go to New Measure, and I start typing out my formula. Net sales per unit. That is the net sales, and Power BI has auto-completion feature, so I select this suggestion here. It's net sales divided by the sum of the sales quantity. I want this measure to reflect in my sales table. So to do that, I click Commit, and here you see it beneath the sales table in the data pane. Because I initially right-clicked the sales table and selected New Measure from the context menu, the measure is going to appear in my sales table. Let's just have a quick look at the formula again. Notice that this measure, it is dependent on an already existing measure, the net sales. Because we have a measure, the net sales per unit, depending on an existing measure, what we have here, the net sales per unit, that is a compound measure. Compound measure is a measure dependent on already existing measures. So let's say I want to visualize the net sales per unit. I can click on it, and there the formula appears. So the measures, they work a little bit different. Just clicking on it won't automatically propagate it to this canvas area. Rather, I'm going to drag and drop the net sales per unit on the canvas. And here we have a very basic column chart. This column chart, it isn't very informative, so I'm going to play around with this visual, and I'm going to try out a tree map. So if I want to convert this column chart to a tree map, I first select the visual, just make sure it is selected, go to my visualizations pane and click tree map. We still have this single block over here. It isn't very informative. We cannot, for example, compare the net sales per unit across different categories. However, in our data set, we do have a table, the product category. And inside that table, we have a field product category. So let's see what happens if I drag and drop this product category into this category area over here in the visualizations pane. So I'm going to drag and drop this here, and you see the tree map being updated accordingly. The size of any block in the tree map, it is dependent on the corresponding value. In this case, the net sales per unit. So the smallest block, which is cell phones, that's in the range of 646765. The value in the tooltip. But if I hover over audio, which is slightly bigger, we see 1088791, and the biggest is TV and video 383138. So for all the different categories involved, the smallest net sales per unit, that occurred for cell phones. On the other hand, the largest net sales per unit, that occurred for TV and video products. And then we have the other categories in between, such as computers, cameras and camcorders, audio, music, movies, and audiobooks. Now let's say that instead of comparing the net sales per unit across the different categories, I want to visualize the data across the different product names. Right? You will see in the data pane beneath the product table, we also have a product name field. So let me get rid of this product category in the category field. I just click the cross symbol over there, drag and drop the product name into category, and this is what you get. There are many different blocks in this tree map because there are a lot more product names in comparison to product categories. We have a very detailed and granular view in this tree map. But because product name is so detailed and varied, we cannot really make sense or derive meaningful information from this tree map. So if I hover here at the top left, the AdventureWorks 52-inch LCD HD TV screen that experienced the largest net sales per unit, and at the opposite end of the spectrum, the social videographer experienced the least amount of net sales per unit. So this is an example of a visual that has a very detailed granularity. Because it is extremely detailed, this tree map is a bit messy. On the other hand, the product category, if I drag and drop that into the category field, I have a tree map that is more easily interpreted. There are in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different product categories, and it is more feasible or practical to derive insights from this tree map. As a matter of fact, you can rank the net sales per unit from largest to the lowest in the following order: TV and video, then cameras and camcorders, third computers, fourth audio, fifth music, movies and audiobooks, and finally cell phones. An important takeaway point from this walkthrough is that you create measures by right-clicking on a table, going to new measure. Alternatively, you can click on a table, like for example sales, and then go to new measure here beneath the table tools ribbon. But a measure is a very dynamic value. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the measure, it updates according to the context of your visual. So in this tree map, the net sales per unit measure, that is calculated dynamically based on the product category. If, on the other hand, I remove the product category and replace it with, for example, the product subcategory, the net sales per unit price is going to update accordingly. A measure isn't like a value in a column where a value is recorded for every single row. A measure, it is a formula that performs some kind of aggregation on a column. And that is explicitly defined in your DAX formula. So if I go back to the example of net sales, the net sales is the sum of the sales amount minus the sum of the discount amount minus the sum of the return amount.